All right, today we're going to talk about training frequency. And I'll be honest with you, this is a lecture that's blew my mind and is going to blow your mind. It's also going to discuss data that really isn't known that well in the United States. One caveat I want to point out is training frequency really is how many times you train a body part per week. And Jake Orms made a good point to me one time, and he said, training frequency is not training volume. Okay? Training frequency is related to training volume, but it is not training volume. It's its own separate variable. So let's talk about this. Okay? One of the things people get worried about with training frequency is overreaching and overtraining. So if we look at what is overreaching, what is overtraining? If you can recover in a matter of days from a single training session, then you are actually what we call, you're not overreach or overtrained. Okay? If you recover, if it takes you days to weeks, like 2 weeks to recover, your performance is down for 2 weeks, you're overreached. If it takes you months to recover your baseline fitness, that's overtrained. So I would argue that most people never actually overtrain. I have overtrained before, actually, a couple times, and literally, you get to a point where you're deathly sick. You actually end out losing muscle. There are new rat models that show that this can occur. But for the most part, most people only overreach. Again, this is what it sort of looks like. If you look at normal periodized training, you have enough balance between recovery and training so that you continually move up. If you shorten that recovery window, you will overreach. Some of the symptoms that you'll notice with overreaching are poor concentration, decreased performance and severe fatigue, decreased appetite, overuse injuries and muscle soreness, poor sleep quality and mood disturbances, and high perceived exertion. So one of the major fears that people have is that training frequency will cause overreaching and overtraining, right? But think about any other sport besides lifting weights. Every sport is subject to the law of practice. And the law of practice suggests that the more you perform a given activity, the greater your performance at that activity will be. In all other sports, we encourage the law of practice and frequency of repetitions. In all other sports, think about it. You don't go, oh, you're a basketball player. You should only scrimmage twice a week because you'll overtrain. Right? It doesn't work that way. You talk about practicing every day. Right, here's your classic Hans Selye's general adaptation syndrome, and we'll discuss this when we get to periodization. But it has 3 phases. You have the alarm reaction, the stage of resistance, and the stage of exhaustion. The alarm reaction is essentially an overload stimulus where performance goes down. Stage of resistance is the supercompensation phase, where you increase specific to the imposed demands. So if you train for hypertrophy, that will be an increase in muscle growth, strength, increase in muscle strength. And then you plateau and you could possibly overreach. That's what we're interested there, okay? And again, that's that supercompensation phase. That's the plateau. Right. This is a little more simplified segment of Hans Selye's model. We have initial stimulus, which causes fatigue. We go down in performance, and then we supercompensate. If we wait too long, past the supercompensation phase, we detrain. So what is supercompensation? Well, if you look here, this is looking at protein synthesis. This is data from Tang. If you look at untrained people, following resistance training, they go through a supercompensation phase that lasts at minimum 28 hours, but we have studies showing up to 72. So up to 72 hours, you have an increase in protein synthesis. But in this study, they took these untrained people, they trained them for only 8 weeks. And look, at 16 hours, they are back to baseline. So that means this is people who have only trained 8 weeks. That supercompensation window is probably stopped by anywhere from 12 to 16 hours. Okay? Now, what if you have been training for 3 years? What if you've been training for 10 years? Maybe that window only lasts, if you train in the morning, till noon. Maybe you only got 4 to 8 hour window. Maybe if you're highly advanced, maybe it only lasts 2 hours. You know, these are things that we really need to look into, but it's what we can assume. So if you're super compensating at that quick a time frame, what does that tell us? And what does that look like, actually? So this is looking at your response to protein following a meal at rest. So notice that protein synthesis peaks at 20 grams, and then it plateaus thereafter. It's a clearly asymptotic or negative accelerating curve. Here, this study looked at resting protein synthesis. Again, you look protein synthesis is linear from 0 to 10 to 20 grams in the open white bar group. That's the rested group, but then plateaus from 20 to 40 grams. In the black group, when you exercise, that response becomes linear. Again, look at this. Look at this. That response is linear after you train. That is what we call the supercompensation phase. That's what it looks like. And you're able to use protein at a much higher rate, meaning now you're not plateauing at 20 grams, but more like 40, maybe more. So this is sort of the response. If you're untrained, your response to taking in protein will be high at 3 hours, 24 hours, maybe 48 hours. If you're trained, on the other hand, that might be back down to baseline by 8 hours, maybe even 4. So what this says is, as such, training frequency should increase with greater training experience because your supercompensation phase lessens. But bodybuilders and strength athletes freak out at the sound of increasing training frequency. Right? You got this guy. What? You want me to train each muscle group more than once per week? I'll overtrain, right? Okay, well, I don't know about that. This is a study out of Troels Rostad's lab in the Norwegian Institute of Sport. I actually just visited Norway recently, and they haven't even published this data yet. What they basically did was they took powerlifters who were training bench squat and deadlift for 3 days a week. They took their same volume and divided it into 6 days per week. So again, if they were doing, for example, 6 sets of squats 3 days a week, they were now doing 3 sets of squats 6 days a week. Their strength, look at the 3 day per week group, their strength barely went up, maybe 5%, whereas a group that did 6 days a week went up 10%. Bench press, same thing happened. What? Training up in your training frequency to 6 days a week and you increase strength? I thought you overtrained. Well, overtraining, the definition is a decrease in performance. Their performance is going up. Clearly, they are not overtrained or overreached. If you look at muscle hypertrophy, nothing. The vastus lateralis, the quadriceps, nothing. Muscle thickness or quadriceps CSA, nothing. Then you look at the 6 days per week, and they're getting, some guys are getting up to like a 30% increase in size. Right? So that's phenomenal. And the point is that these are really well-trained guys. Really well-trained guys. So training frequency is very important. Right? We got Ronnie Coleman here, lightweight, right? Frequency is also common among elite Olympic lifters. Elite Olympic weightlifters train 3 to 4 times per day on average. There's even more, sometimes 6 times a day, sometimes 8 times a day. Am I telling you to do that? No, but I am telling you that's very interesting that occurs. And there's actually support for training more than once a day, a body part. Hakkinen took elite Olympic weightlifters, and you look at their strength before. He then had them train, basically took their training volume and had that just followed them training once per day. took that same training volume and split it into morning and evening sessions, and look how much their force went up. Their hypertrophy also went up. So what this is telling us is that increasing training frequency is a critical variable both within a single day and throughout the week. And this here supports that maybe the supercompensation phase does last short in highly trained people because they're getting benefits just by training twice in a single day. One of the things I want to point out, though, is if you're training frequently, you have to have proper nutrition. This is a study that we did. Basically, you look here, we're looking at creatine kinase, which is muscle damage. We purposely overreached individuals, and basically the dotted group were placebo. And you notice that during normal training, their creatine kinase, which is muscle damage, went up. When we overreached them, weeks 9 and 10, it skyrocketed, but the HMB group, not so much. Okay, so remember this theory that we have here. Initially, performance goes down, then it goes up. We supercompensate, we wait too long, we detrain. An overreaching cycle looks like this. You increase fatigue, you don't fully recover, right? You train again. You don't fully recover, you train again, and then you allow for more rest. So that's another thing you can do with frequency. Sometimes you can purposely overreach. But the normal purposeful overreaching, I mean, basically, instead of dividing your volume up over 6 days, you keep your volume the same and do it every day. That would lead to overreaching, which could lead to supercompensation. But it's a very, very advanced technique, and I would go with the normal frequency training before I move to this model. And we can sort of see that here when you train with HMB, for example. You go up during the overreaching phase, you only go down a little, and then you supercompensate. Whereas the placebo group went up, then they drastically went down, and they didn't even recover. So they're starting to enter an overreaching state, because after 2 weeks, they had not fully recovered. Remember, though, frequency has to be balanced. People usually just think about recovery and training as the only two variables affecting overreaching. But psychological stress and social stress also impact training adaptation. So if you have a social stress, like your girlfriend left you, and you interpret that as being the worst thing in your life, you could overtrain on very low frequency. So you need to tailor your frequency to your physiological, your psychological, and your social stress. We recommend that definitely when you're taking like finals or have hard exams, probably you should tailor or modify your training frequency to less. So how should you institute this? Well, let's say you presently train 18 sets for legs each Monday. You can start by increasing frequency to 3 6-set workouts per week. This will result in greater overall protein synthesis. Once you've adapted to training more frequently, each session can be increased in volume. For example, you might perform one high-volume 16 workout set, one heavy 6-set workout, and one moderate 12 workout set. Or, what you can do instead of that, I think would be more advantageous, is maybe even taking the 18-set workout and dividing it into 3 sets, 6 days per week. See how that works. If you have to increase the volume, that's fine. But I would definitely modulate that volume throughout the week. Volume, one thing I do want to point out is volume is important. It's separate from frequency, but if you look at the Bulgarian weightlifters, daily training volume from 1966 to 1984, you see a drastic increase. And so training volume is also an important variable for increasing performance. Here, they trained 3 days a week. Robins had people do 1 set versus 4 set versus 8 sets. The top group is the 8-set group. The 4-set group's the middle, the 1 set's the bottom. Notice that the 8-set group made the greatest gains. But again, this 3 days a week, I would still recommend, even in this study, doing 4 sets a day instead of 8 sets 3 times a week. With that being said, thank you, and I hope you have a new tool for your Wepatrol, and I'll see you next lecture.